Hello, everyone. This is Jill Florent, and I'm with the Amazon QuickSight team. I head up our customer success initiative, and so happy that you could join us today. This is one of a series of workshops that we're doing as part of our spring learning series, and today we're going to be focused on the developer experience. And within the session that we're doing today, we will be focusing in on anonymous embedding and going through a set of things that we'll show you on our screen and invite you to join along with us. Hopefully you're a little bit experienced with QuickSight, either authoring or maybe attended one of our prior workshops. I would call out that one of the important set of things that you'll want to have is an AWS account with admin privileges, ideally a QuickSight Enterprise account, which will be able to use our most advanced features. You should have a basic understanding of JavaScript and Python and have access to the session capacity pricing. And we'll talk about that in just a few moments. One of the things that I would like to call out, we are going to be focusing in on answering as many of your questions today as possible. So by attending live, one of the benefits is that you get to interact with our team directly. We will be presenting kind of in listen-only mode most of the time, but feel free to post questions in the chat window, and we'll do our best to get those answered. I would also flag that we have a QuickSight community that after today will be a great place to go and get your questions answered. That's the better place to post questions if you wanted to have access to them after the webinar. We will not be saving the questions or sending out the list of questions and answers today. You'll want to just take note of that during the time together, but keep in mind that the community is a good place to get questions answered after today's session. Yes, we will be recording today, and we will make the workshop available on our YouTube channel, and that should be posted by the end of the week. The other thing I would let you know is we're going to be sharing a content link for you to follow along with the workshop. So with that, I'd love to actually go ahead and turn it over to my colleague, Raj, who is a QuickSight solutions architect on our team. And Raj, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and invite you to go ahead and begin sharing your screen. And if you wanted to just kick things off and maybe start with a little introduction.
Thank you, Jill. So let me start by asking a question to the audience. Imagine you're looking up a company's website and you land on this page. This page details about their success story. Now, what can you deduce from this page? There are long lines of text, and there are some information about their revenue and the regions they work with, and also their team contribution, right? It takes a while to go and gather all these very limited data portrayed here. However, if another company is to portray the same information like this, what would your thoughts be? You can visualize the data in an instant, and even if you wish so, you can interact with the dashboard. Now, this provides a vastly improved user experience, right? This is the advantage of embedded analytics that you can leverage using QuickSight. My name is Raj, and I'm here to talk and walk you through how to use QuickSight's anonymous embedding to enrich your application. We'll be talking about what embedded analytics is and why you need embedded analytics. We'll cover different flavors of embedding offered by QuickSight, and followed by that, we'll have a demonstration of implementing anonymous embedding. Please do feel free to ask any questions during this presentation. Now, data is something essential for any organization, and there are applications that generate high volume of structured and unstructured data. Now, this could be clickstream data, operational metrics, user data, and even something more. To derive meaningful insights from this data, customers rely on business intelligence tools. But a traditional BI tool or business intelligence tool where data resides in a disparate system, it requires a data engineering team to go in, connect, and provide continuous integration. Now, you can build your own BI solution and work through the complex hassle of building and maintaining dedicated infrastructure, have a separate engineering team, and all of these could be resource intensive and even expensive. Or you could simply choose to consume a traditional business intelligence solution that is server based, really cannot scale at demand, and is very restrictive. That's something that doesn't align with most business needs. In either case, end users have to switch between your application and the BI tool. Now, this could be the requirement of some customers where business insights are derived for consumption well within the organization and leadership. However, we do have other customers who prefer a unified application with integrated BI insights. Switching between applications is not a great experience like we saw initially, and not to mention, it's very time consuming. Let's consider a fictitious company, Binkysoft, with such a need. Now, for Binkysoft, using a traditional BI, visualizing data is a separate, isolated user experience. The application could be an enterprise business application like SAP, or it could even be a custom application for some internal process. It could be a non-user source of data, such as a fleet of IoT devices, or even could source data from a database or a data warehouse. But the point here is the generation of data is actually separate from the visualization of data. The user signs into a console with the express purpose of just viewing or creating dashboards and gaining insights. So they switch between their application and their business intelligence solution. But in contrast, with embedded analytics, the user can visualize the same data within the same application where it is generated. Here, the user experience is vastly improved. Binkysoft, an independent software vendor, can also build a richer, more interactive user experience and even upsell this as a new service to their audience or to their customers. With embedded analytics, usability of your application can be greatly increased and you can delight your users. For example, a financial service software company could embed a dashboard, and that dashboard can allow their customers to interact with their own portfolio, visually representing their data in an instant. Now, is there an AWS offering that you can leverage to enhance your user experience? That's where QuickSight comes in. QuickSight allows you to embed dashboards and visuals quickly into your applications, while it can also retain the look and feel of your application. The advantage here is QuickSight is serverless. It can automatically scale to tens of hundreds of thousands of users, and it handles the heavy lifting of infrastructure setup and maintenance. This allows you to embed analytics at hyperscale. We have Blackboard, a leading edtech company, and their feedback is, by removing the step of interpretation, embedded visualizations make insights more useful and actionable. With QuickSight, we were able to deliver on our promise of embedding visualizations quickly, supporting the rapid iteration that we require at the large scale needed to support our global user community. There is so much value embedded analytics can add to an organization. For an independent software vendor, first, showing users the value derived from their actions in application, it can definitely increase their user engagement and user interest. Now, providing such level of integrated dashboards and analytics can also increase the core value proposition. In most cases, insights provided through embedded analytics, these are not accessible via other means, so users are also often willing to pay a premium to access them. This creates an upsell opportunity for the company. For enterprises, it totally removes the need to switch between applications, so you can visualize your data within the same application that generates it, or even the same application that consumers use. It provides better analytics, and also the user experience is vastly improved here, and customer satisfaction is also improved. Lastly, the quality of insights and how this is delivered in your application, it lets you differentiate your application versus all the competition in the market. Now, QuickSight offers all of these benefits via 3 embedded scenarios or flavors. Let's start with the first one, where we embed a dashboard with user provisioning. And by user provisioning, I mean creating users within QuickSight that match your application's users. For most applications or company, embedded dashboard would require user level permission and data restriction. You would have users log in, and you might want to show data specific to users and data that pertains to a particular user or a group of users. You don't want them to see all the data or data that belongs to someone else, right? Now, QuickSight enables this scenario with the ability to have different named users within QuickSight, and also the ability to have row level and columns level security applied to them. Now, having this row level column level security within QuickSight enables you to negate the need to restrict access within your application and simplifies the whole overall process. This would allow you to scale to tens of thousands of users in your application with the right level of permission. For this scenario, we have a corresponding QuickSight user created that is mapped to one of your application users. So there is a one-on-one relationship between an application user and a QuickSight user. So this way, the restrictions that you apply for that QuickSight user is reflected on the application user as well, who is consuming the embedded dashboard. So the underlying heavy lifting of securing data is simplified and is moved away from the application. So your application admins can focus on the actual product and application development. Now, this flavor of embedding is particularly useful for independent software vendors who offer multi-tenancy. Multi-tenancy is where you have your own clients and you want to segregate your clients and show data pertaining to only a certain client, and one client's data is not supposed to be shown to a different client. Now, QuickSight supports isolating users into logical groups called namespaces, and a combination of all of these features, namespaces, row level security, and column level security, would allow customers set up a multi-tenant environment for their clients. However, if a customer is looking to embed public data, we offer embedding without user provisioning, or anonymous embedding. That is our core focus for our today's session. Now, anonymous embedding allows you to embed the same dashboard for tens of thousands of users without any user management. Now, this is particularly useful when you have dashboard that contains the same data that you want to portray to any customer or user who visits your application. Just embed the dashboard into your application, and QuickSight actually handles the heavy lifting, and QuickSight automatically scales based on demand. No matter 10 users or thousands of users come into your application to view the embedded dashboard, QuickSight can scale automatically, and QuickSight can accommodate that without you having to do any kind of server management. This is a powerful game changer for most applications. For example, a public embedded dashboard on a website that contains public safety statistics, and it could update every hour. And when it needs to be shared with thousands of users, you could embed it into your application. Or you could even have a dashboard with key KPIs that is intended for all of the customers who come in and view your application. We support such use cases, and QuickSight allows you to stand up these dashboards in hours without any user or server provisioning. Now, examples of this situation or anonymous embedded dashboards could be public statistics, for example, within a country or a city, or a dashboard of company-wide statistics available to all users who need to come in and view that data every day, every hour. Then we have our session embedding. Everything we've seen so far has a centralized team creating these dashboards and users just viewing them. But what if you have customers who actually want to come into your application and they need the ability to actually create their own dashboards or create their own visuals which they want to share with their team? Now, for that, we have embedded authoring. There are many cases where you want to implement this. Say, for example, if you are an independent software vendor and you have multiple clients, you could allow your client or the administrators of your clients the ability to come in, create dashboards and visuals, which they could share with their own team. This provides an upsell opportunity for you as well. Now, we call it QuickSight authoring, and QuickSight authoring can also be embedded in application, and this allows you to provide a curated data exploration and data creation experience all within your application. Now, when combined with namespaces and custom user permissions like row level security or column level security that we talked about earlier, this provides a scalable multi-tenant experience that can provide even new revenue streams and totally differentiate your application from your competition. Now, how can customers embed a dashboard? The process to embed QuickSight dashboard can be simplified into 4 steps. Now, these steps are at the base applicable to session embedding, anonymous embedding, or even user-based embedding. So essentially, when you understand this workflow, embedding using any of these 3 flavors become easier. Now, the first step that we have here would be the user accessing your application or your website, where they authenticate into your website using any of the authentication mechanism. Now, the important thing to remember here is QuickSight, your application could use any kind of authentication mechanism, like it could be Okta, it could be OpenID, like Cognito, or it could even be an authentication that is homegrown within your company. Now, when users authenticate into your application and log into your website, the website would then request an embedded dashboard from your application server. Now, your application server could be your own servers running, or it could be an EC2 instance that is running in AWS, or even serverless like Lambda. Now here you would notice that we have a prerequisite of creating a user within QuickSight, but for today's session, the context is anonymous embedding, so we do not need this particular part. So as soon as your application requests an embedded dashboard from the application server, the application server invokes an API called get dashboard embedded URL. Now this API reach out to QuickSight, and based on the dashboard reference that you pass, which we call the dashboard ID, it would generate a URL that you can iframe or utilize in the front end of your application. Now, once the server generates the embedded URL using the API, it sends it back into your front end, and using JavaScript and even our QuickSight's JavaScript library, you can embed that into your front end application, and users can now see the data, the embedded dashboard within your application. No, in summary, we saw what QuickSight or embedded analytics provides to your company. It allows you to ease away from server management. It can scale, QuickSight can scale automatically to accommodate tens of thousands of users. And having embedded visuals definitely would provide you a differentiator from all of your competition and even provide an upsell opportunity. We also saw the 3 different embedded use cases, and today our focus would be on creating an embedded dashboard that you can utilize in your application. So this anonymous embedding part would be without any kind of user provisioning within QuickSight. So for the demonstration today for the implementation of anonymous embedding, we will be following the steps that is detailed in our workshop portal. Now, this portal has all the steps that we'll be following today, and it even has a CloudFormation template that you can simply take it and run into your environment if you're looking to do it within seconds, and if you're looking to run it through or walk through it within seconds anytime later. Or you could also follow the steps that is listed in this portal under anonymous embedding session after this session. Now, for anonymous embedding, we do have some prerequisites. So it starts with an AWS account and QuickSight Enterprise Edition running there. So you would need a QuickSight Enterprise Edition subscription. And another prerequisite needed is you should actually have session capacity pricing enabled. Now, the reason why we have session capacity pricing enabled is because QuickSight, without any kind of users provision within QuickSight, there is no way how many users come in and access the dashboard. There is no way to actually track that. So we need to enable QuickSight session capacity pricing, and the steps to do that is detailed in here as well. So when you open QuickSight, you can navigate to the top right, wherein you have your username. And when you click on that, you'll have an option called Manage QuickSight. So when you go into Manage QuickSight, you can go into Subscriptions, and you can enable session capacity pricing from there. So once that subscription is confirmed, you can actually implement anonymous dashboard embedding in your application. Now, also another requirement for this workshop is a basic understanding of JavaScript and Python. The focus of this workshop would be more towards setting up an infrastructure than actually developing a QuickSight dashboard. Now, if you're interested in knowing more about developing a QuickSight dashboard with all of its features, I would highly recommend you to visit our recorded session for our Building Advanced Dashboard workshop. Now, with that being said, let's get started. So the embedded workflow that we would be going through would be creating an API gateway and an AWS Lambda function. The reason for having these two would be the AWS Lambda function would act as our backend server, and the API gateway would be our entry point for our application. So when users come in, when they navigate to the API gateway's URL, API gateway in turn would trigger Lambda function, and based on the type of anonymous embedding that we implement, the Lambda function would either return a HTML page with the embedded dashboard content within it, or it would retain a HTML page, which would in turn call the Lambda function again to retrieve an embedded dashboard. Now, I will walk through both of these. While we start implementing this, I will show you the differences between these two, and I will show you what a dynamic site looks like when anonymously embedded, and also I will walk you through a static anonymous website, and I'll show you the differences as well. Now, let's get started. Navigate to your AWS console, and within your AWS console, let's go into QuickSight. So search for QuickSight at the top search bar and click on QuickSight. Now, once within QuickSight, you will have an option to navigate to your dashboard, your analysis, or a dataset. Since I have already created the dashboards that I want to anonymously embed, I have added it to folders. So I have an anonymous embedding folder where I will go in, and here I have the dashboards that I want to embed today. I will be embedding 2 of these dashboards in my application. So for example, if I click on public data, it has the dashboard that I showed you earlier. And once you open a dashboard, at the top in the browser URL, you would see a list of alphanumeric characters after dashboard slash. This is a dashboard ID. A dashboard ID uniquely represents a dashboard. Every resource within QuickSight has its own ID. So having an ID allows you to rename all the resources. For example, even if I rename this dashboard from public data into something else, the ID would remain the same. So even if you were to update this dashboard, and if you have this embedded and you do not want to change the dashboard, you can simply just use the ID to embed it to do any actions. And then even when making changes to the dashboard does not affect this ID, and in turn, you do not have to rework anything. So the dashboard ID would never change, even if there is any change to the dashboard itself. Now, let me make a note of these dashboard ID for this dashboard, which we'll be using later. The next step is I will go and choose another dashboard that I want to embed. Now, today's embedding session would cover embedding 2 different dashboards. So for example, this is an anonymously embedded dashboard in an application. You would notice that we are not in the QuickSight console, but in a custom web page that embeds a dashboard. And at the top right, you'll notice that we have an option to select different dashboards. So right now it starts with public 1, but if I want to go into public 2, I can simply switch to that dashboard based on the selection over here. Now let's see how we can implement this right from start and how we can overcome this error that shows up when you switch to a dashboard. Now there are different errors that you might see. One of them could be a session where you could have logged in to QuickSight in the same web browser, and this session could conflict or contribute to the embedded dashboard viewing experience in the same browser session. So it is always recommended to view the embedded dashboard in a different browser session or even in an incognito window, or not have the QuickSight, your actual QuickSight console logged into the same browser session to avoid any conflicts like we saw earlier. Okay. Now, back to QuickSight. Let's take another dashboard that we might want to embed. I'll open the second dashboard here and I will copy this dashboard's ID. Okay. Now that I have chosen the 2 dashboards that I want to embed into my application, let's open the QuickSight console again and let's start with the very first step. Now, the very first step that we need to do is we actually create permissions for our Lambda function to generate an embedded URL and pass that embedded URL to our application. So for example, when going back to the steps, we see that the application server actually needs to perform this API called get dashboard embedded URL. Now, to allow this application server, which will be our Lambda function, to generate or call this API, we need to allow it some level of permissions first. So within AWS, the permissions are assigned using IAM or Identity Access Management entities. So for example, a Lambda function could be associated with a role, an IAM role, which would allow or empower that Lambda function to do any actions defined in that IAM role. Now, the IAM role could have different sets of permissions, and in this particular case, we will create a new permission policy that allows that IAM role access to get dashboard embed URL API call. And when we associate that IAM role with the application server Lambda function, it could in turn call get dashboard embedded URL. Now, let's see how we can do that. So navigate to the AWS console and search for Identity and Access Management, IAM in short, and click on that. On the left navigation, choose Policies and choose Create Policy. So within Create Policy, let's start by providing access to QuickSight to generate an embedded URL. So for service, I will choose QuickSight. Now, actions are the actual permissions that you want to either allow or deny for this particular IAM resource, or in this IAM policy. So the first permission that I would need to allow is get dashboard embed URL. So I can search for that get dashboard embed URL, and once I check that, this permission or this action is added. The next action that I want to allow here is get anonymous user embed URL. So the search for get anonymous, you will see that action coming up here. I will check that. And once I close this, I can see that these two actions are added. Now comes the part where we specify where or on which resource these two actions can apply. Now with anonymous embedding, you should know the exact dashboards that you actually want to embed in your web application. For example, you can provide different dashboard IDs here or different dashboard resources here. And these functions, these actions of generating an embedded URL would only apply to those dashboards. If you are allowing access to for these actions to be performed on all dashboards, then there is a high chance that when embedding, some users could provide a different dashboard ID, which might be an internal dashboard, and that internal dashboard could show up in your web application to all of these users. So to prevent that kind of other dashboard access, we need to provide exactly the dashboards that we need to be anonymously embedded. So for example, let me show here. So when you click on specific resources, you can click on add ARN. And here, I'll be providing the dashboard's ID and the region which I want to embed or anonymously embed. So the region would be US East 1, and the resource ID would be the dashboard IDs that I copied. So let me paste one of the dashboard IDs here, and I click on add. I'll paste another dashboard ID as well because I want to embed two different dashboards in my application. So the region is still US East 1, and I will paste my other dashboard ID. I click on add. Now we have defined the actions that we want to perform on these two dashboards. So the IAM resource or any resource that is using this policy can only generate an embedded URL for these two dashboards, and it cannot generate an embedded URL for any other dashboard, thereby preventing any misuse of accessing internal dashboards. So once this is done, I'll click on tags. I do not wish to add any tags right now, and I'll click on review. Here, I can provide a name for my policy. Let me call it QuickSight Anonymous Embed. Provide a name, a description is optional, and I will create this policy. Now we have the policy created. So this policy can be applied to any IAM user, group, or IAM role, thereby providing that IAM entity the power to do these two actions. For a Lambda function to call any API, it needs to be associated with a role. So let's go in and create an IAM role. So on the left navigation pane, choose roles. And in this section, click on create role. This page shows who can actually use or assume this role to perform the actions defined within the permission policy. So we want Lambda, our Lambda function, to use this role. So we click on Lambda, click on permissions, and here are the permissions that we want this role to have. So we just created a permission policy with get dashboard embed URL call. So in here, let me search for the permission policy that was just created. I will select that permission policy, click on tags. I don't wish to add any tag right now, and click on review. And here, I will provide a name for this role. And I will click on create role. All right, so we have created our role now. So going back, we have created the permissions required by our server to run this get dashboard embed URL call and in turn generate an embedded URL. We are done with this step. Next, would be creating the actual Lambda function, which will act as our application server. Now, this Lambda function will use the IAM role that we just created and generate an embedded URL call. So we are about to create the application server. To create a Lambda function in the AWS console at the search bar, search for Lambda, open the Lambda console. And once you're in the Lambda console, click on create function at the top right. We will be creating a brand new Lambda function. However, we'll be reusing the code that is provided in the workshop over here. So coming back to the Lambda function, choose author from scratch, and I will provide a name for this function. Now the code that we'll be using would be Python, so I will choose the runtime as Python 3.8. And under permissions, we'll be choosing the role that we just created. So Lambda would allow you to create a role by itself, and you can utilize that. But since we've already created a role with the exact permissions that we need, I'll go and click on permissions, change default execution role, and I will choose use an existing role. And from the dropdown here, I can search for the role that was just created. And once I choose the role, we'll click on create function. Now this has created a Lambda function for me that will act as the application server with the right amount of permissions that is needed to perform an anonymous embedding. Now, when you create a Lambda function from scratch, it would provide a default level of code for you, but we'll be using the code that is provided in the workshop. So I'll go back to the workshop, and if I go into Web Content Lambda, there is a package that I can directly download and use. I will download this and I will upload this to my Lambda function. So whatever code is written in this package is available in my Lambda function. Let me download that. So once I have that downloaded, I will go back to my Lambda function, and on the top right, I will click on upload from, and I will choose .zip file. And I click on upload, And here I will have access to my Git anonymous embed dashboard.zip, which I just downloaded. I will click on that, choose open and save. Now you will notice that the code that was provided in that package is available in our Lambda function. Now I will walk through the code, or I will walk through how this particular piece of code snippet works once we are actually done with the embedding, so that it'll be easier to understand the whole flow where it transfers and how it works. So for now, I will just leave it as such. And for now, I will move on to the next step of creating an API gateway to trigger this Lambda. Now, in this section, we have covered the application server part, and we are moving on to the section where we create an API gateway that would in turn call our Lambda function or the application server. Now, the reason that we use API gateway is we provide a medium for our end users. So when they access a URL, a backend server is triggered, and the APIs that are run at the backend server can be forwarded to the front end. So we will be creating the actual application part here right now. So at the top, search for API gateway and open the API gateway console. Now, if this is the first time that you are opening the API gateway console, your interface would be different, where you'll have an option just like see REST API, create a new API. But since I already have some APIs here, the console experience is slightly different. So in this case, I can go in and click on Create API at the top right. We'll be creating a REST API today, so scroll down and I'll choose Build for a REST API. I'll provide a name for my API. Let's call it. The description is optional, so I will go ahead and create this. Click on Create API. Now, once we have this API created, I'll go ahead and create a resource within this API. So at the top, click on Actions and click on Create Resource. Now, a resource is something that provides a path for you to trigger an API. So for example, when you have created an API with an API gateway, you could have multiple paths, and each of those paths could call a different Lambda function or even perform different actions. So it is not necessary that you need to create multiple APIs with an API gateway for your individual web application pages. You could have just one page, but you could have multiple paths that point to different web pages or different applications even. So I will give this, so the path is defined by the resource that you create. So for this resource, I will give it a name. Since we're focusing only on anonymous embedding today, I'll be creating just one resource. Provide it a name, click on Enable API Gateway Cars, and I will create this resource. Now, under this resource, I will create a method. So at the top action, click on Create Method, and you will see a new dropdown here. And in this dropdown, choose Get and click on the check. Now, this method actually points to the resource that we want to trigger via API gateway. So we have set up our application server using Lambda, and to trigger that or point this API gateway to that particular Lambda function, we create this method. So I'll choose integration type as Lambda function, and I'll check on use Lambda proxy integration. So so the reason that we check use Lambda proxy integration is we can pass parameters or values to our underlying Lambda function as events. I'll talk a little bit more about passing those events and utilizing these events when we go back to our Lambda function and have a code walkthrough. But for now, I'll keep this checked so that we can actually pass different parameters or values to our Lambda function so that our code generates the appropriate content based on the value we pass. And the Lambda region that I'll be using would be US East 1 since I have it created in US East 1 region. And I will search for the Lambda function. So this is the Lambda function that we just created. I'll choose that. And I'll go in here and I will click on save. Now you'll have a dialog where it says we are going to give API gateway permission to invoke our Lambda function, since that is what we want to do. And then click on green. OK. And the API gateway is created now. Now the next step of this API gateway is we go back in here to deploy this API. So deploying this API is like creating a new stage where we actually save all the changes that we made and we make our API available to access. So go back to Actions, click on Actions again, and choose Deploy API. So you could have multiple stages of your gateway. You could have maybe a development stage, you could have a pre-production stage, or even a production stage. Since we are just testing the feature out, I will choose New Stage and provide a stage name as Test. And I will click on Deploy. And now the API has been deployed and is ready for use. If you notice, you have an invocation URL over here. Now, the invocation URL is the URL for this API through which we can access this API, which would in turn trigger our Lambda function. Now, let's go back here. And on the left navigation page, we are in the stages section. So this shows the different stages that we created. And since we just created one, it shows our test stage. So if I click on the drop down for that test stage, you can see the resource and the method that we created. So if I click on the method, it shows an invocation URL for that particular method. So if we have multiple, you could have multiple methods, each pointing to different Lambda functions that do different actions. Since we have just one Lambda function, we have one method, and this is the exact URL that would trigger that Lambda function. Now, going back, we have created our application server. We have created an API using API gateway that would in turn trigger our application server. Now, the next question or the question you might have is, okay, we have the API gateway and the server, but where exactly is the HTML page or the front-end page that we want to show to users? That is part of the Lambda code. So if you notice in the Lambda code that we uploaded, you will see that we have two different HTML pages. One is a dynamic sample HTML page, another is a static sample HTML page. This is because we can implement anonymous embedding or utilize this code to pull up a dynamic web page or even a static web page. I'll show you both of these and talk about the difference between these two. But just to showcase, the actual HTML page lives within the Lambda function, and the HTML page is actually shown when users navigate to this API gateway. So this API gateway would trigger the Lambda function, which would in turn provide us with the HTML page. Now, this is just one example of implementation. You could implement it in a different way as well. You could have your web page hosted in your own environment, or you could have a static web page hosted in S3 and provided through CloudFront. And in turn, you could have that web page trigger this API gateway and Lambda function. The workflow remains the same, but there are multiple ways you could actually implement it. Now that we have this API gateway and the Lambda function set up, let's go back to QuickSight. Now, within QuickSight, to allow this API gateway's URL to actually pull up the embedded dashboard content or the content of these two dashboards, we need to let QuickSight know, okay, this URL is actually authorized to pull up this information, or this URL can actually pull up the embedded dashboards. So in order to do that, go into QuickSight and click on your username at the top right, and I will click on Manage QuickSight. So in here, within Manage QuickSight, you will have, as an admin, different option in Enterprise Edition, and click on Domains and Embedding on the left navigation. Here, we will provide the API Gateway's domain. So I will go back to API Gateway. I will copy the domain till.com, and I will provide it here. Click on Add, and you'll see that it has been added over here. All right. The next step that we actually need to do is, let's go back to the Lambda function. Now, in the Lambda function, we need to know from which AWS account to act on, and we need to know what are the two dashboard IDs that we need to use. So for example, if I want to embed two of these dashboards, I need to let the Lambda function know, or the application server know, what are those two dashboard IDs. So in order to do that, let's go into the Lambda function again, and here I will create different environment variables. Now, environment variables are kind of like variables where you provide values which your Lambda code can refer to during runtime. So once I open the Lambda function, I'll click on Configuration, and in the left navigation, click on Environment Variables, and I will choose Edit. Here, I will click on Add Environment Variable, and over here, I will create a new variable called Dashboard List. And for values, I will be passing along the two dashboard IDs I copied at the very beginning, the dashboards that I actually want to embed. So one of the dashboard IDs would be this. And I'll add a comma to separate the next dashboard ID that I will be add, and I will add the second dashboard ID. And once I have this added, I will add another environment variable. Now this would be dashboard name list. We provide a dashboard ID list and a dashboard name list, so it is easier for end users to actually see a named dashboard instead of just its ID. For example, here, instead of seeing the dashboard ID, we want to show either public 1 or public 2, an actual name for which dashboard they want to switch to or view when embedded. So that is what we'll be providing here. So I will give it a name. For my first dashboard, I will have public 1. And for my second dashboard, I want to name it as public 2. Now, I'll add another environment variable, which would be the dashboard region. Now, the dashboard region represents where our dashboards exist. So I have all my dashboards in US East 1, and I will provide that value. So in this step, we have provided the list of dashboards that we want to embed. So that provided two dashboard IDs, and we provided corresponding user-friendly names for those dashboard IDs that we want to show at our front-end page, and we provided the dashboard region. I will click on Save. So once this is saved, I will go into General Configuration, choose on Edit, and I want to increase the timeout setting for this particular Lambda function. So I want to allow the code running within to have more time and simply not just quit and within just the default value of 3 seconds. So I will provide 30 seconds as the timeout, and I will save. Now, coming back to the code, we have our environment variables set up. Another advantage of having those environment variables which we just created is your developers don't have to come back to the Lambda function and make changes to the actual code every time there is a change in, say, the dashboard ID or the dashboard region. They could simply modify the environment variable without touching the code and reducing the deployment process in turn. Now we have our Lambda function ready. We have our API gateway ready, which would trigger the Lambda function. And we have also whitelisted the API gateway's URL within QuickSight. So QuickSight knows that this is a domain, and QuickSight can pass the dashboard to this domain. Now let's see if this actually works. Now, let's go back to the API gateway. And I will copy this invocation URL. And I will open this in a new session. I will open this in a new private window. We can see the whole process worked, and the Lambda function returned one of the HTML pages, which is the dynamic web page. And here we have the dashboard that we just provided, and we have the dashboard embedded. At the top right, you'll see we have an option to choose between two different dashboards. Let me click on the second dashboard. And immediately the second dashboard that for which the ID we provided in the Lambda function gets embedded as well, and it's returned to the front end as well. Now we saw how to embed dashboards anonymously without any kind of user provisioning in your application. Now again, this is just one of the methods that you could implement, and there are multiple ways that you could utilize our QuickSight's server APIs as well as front-end JavaScript APIs to implement this embedding. With this, we can take a short break, a short 15 minutes break. And once after the break, can come back and I'll walk you through the code on what exactly happens when we load this embedded dashboard. And I will show you the two different ways that you can actually invoke this Lambda function. So one is just the regular method wherein a dynamic HTML page is pulled up, and another is we pass a mode. We pass a value or parameter called mode as static, and in this scenario, a static web page is pulled up which invokes the API gateway and Lambda function. I will walk you through the differences between these two, how these are executed in the Lambda function, and that will provide you more context around this. Thanks, everyone. So after the break, we will start with a walkthrough of the code. And once we're done with the walkthrough, summarize what we saw today during this session. And after that, we will open the floor for live question and answers. So if you have any questions, you can definitely post those and we can have a most live interactive session for a Q&A. All right. Coming back, we saw how this whole embedded URL is generated and how we can anonymously embed a dashboard in your application. Now, let's go back to the code and I will show you what exactly happens at the backend and when this API gateway is triggered and what exactly is run in this Lambda code. Just to showcase, I have opened all of these three files, the lambda function.python file, the dynamic sample HTML file, and the static sample HTML file in here. So when we invoke this API gateway, it triggers this lambda function, and within this lambda function, we have an AWS account ID, which is generated from the context, as in it is generated from where, or the API, it is the account ID is generated from the API gateway where we triggered. So based on the account ID that is provided by the API gateway, we gather the account ID, and then we gather the dashboard ID list from our environment variable. So, and if you remember in our Lambda function environment variable, we provided the list of dashboard IDs to use, and that is being used here. And also the dashboard name list, that is the name that we want to show in our dashboard dropdown, is also pulled up from the environment variable, and we pull up the region where our dashboards reside in QuickSight. Now the next part is where we decide if we want to show the static HTML page or the dynamic HTML page. Now the difference between generating a static and a dynamic HTML page is when we are actually returning the HTML page, and also if the HTML page already contains the embedded URL. For example, let's start with the dynamic HTML page. So based on this code, we check if when invoking the API gateway URL, if you are passing any kind of parameter at the end. So if you notice in here, we have the API gateway URL, and I append it with a parameter called mode, and I set it to static. Now, if I don't provide any parameter here, the dashboard still loads fine. And in this scenario, we go into dynamic mode where the dynamic sample HTML file is returned. So let's consider this scenario. I don't provide any value, so the mode is set to dynamic here. Now, the next part of the code, if mode is dynamic, we pull up the corresponding HTML file from within our content or from within the content folder. The HTML file is loaded, and the next step is we call a function called QuickSight, get QuickSight dashboard URL, which passes the AWS account ID, the list of dashboard IDs, and the dashboard region. So this function is defined here. And within this function, we create a QuickSight object, and using that QuickSight object, we call get dashboard embed URL. Now the parameters that we pass to this API get dashboard embed URL is the AWS account ID, the namespace, which here is a default. We are not, for this purpose of the demo, we don't have a multi-tenant environment setup, so we're just using the default namespace, and we pass the list of dashboard IDs to this API call. Now, it is not necessary that you pass a list with multiple dashboard IDs. You could simply just pass one dashboard ID, and you could still run this API to generate an embed URL for that particular dashboard alone. But having multiple dashboard IDs provides you the flexibility of showing which dashboard you want your users to interact with. And even if you have multiple dashboard IDs, when you're loading it or when you're embedding it, you do not have to call get dashboard embed URL for all the different dashboard IDs. So for example, in here, when we load our embedded dashboard, and if I switch between the dashboards, I'm not making a call to get dashboard embed URL again because I passed multiple dashboard IDs here. So the embedded URL returned from this API already contains both of those dashboards. So in turn, we are saving another API call to the backend, and users can simply switch between the different dashboards. Thereby, even we're saving some overhead here. So the additional dashboard IDs can be provided here and with just the starting dashboard over here. And the next part is the identity type as anonymous. Now, this is the crucial parameter that differentiates user-based embedding versus anonymous embedding. The identity type, when it's anonymous, we do not provide any kind of QuickSight user reference for this API gateway call, for this API call. If we actually want to generate an embedded URL that is specific to a particular QuickSight user, we can set identity type as either QuickSight or IAM, and we would be passing a user ARN that refers to a QuickSight user. Now, having it anonymous, it totally negates us from creating any kind of users within QuickSight, and QuickSight automatically scales to how many users ever who are accessing this embedded dashboard, and we're not referencing any kind of QuickSight users under the hood. Next is the session lifetime in minutes, where we want to provide the value of how long this session is valid. So when you generate this embedded URL, you need to consume it within your application within 5 minutes. But once you consume it in your application, like your HTML page, the whole session lasts however minutes that you provide over here. So here, the value provided is 120 minutes. So the session is valid for 120 minutes after you use it in your HTML page. Now, other two options are specific to dashboards. So for example, when opening a QuickSight dashboard, you see different options. Let me reload my console session. All right. Pause. All right. So when navigating to any of the dashboard here, for example, you would see multiple options here. Undo, redo options. So if you apply any filter or if you provide any parameter value to actually filter the dashboards by or the visuals by, you can undo your changes here and reflect or go back to the previous step. And also we'll have an option called reset, which kind of takes the dashboard back to its original state after a user interacts with it. Like after a user applies any kind of filter values, if they want to go back to the original state, they can click on reset. Now these options, undo, redo, and reset, you can either choose to show them in your embedded application, or you can choose to disable them. These two parameters are the values that you set to either show those undo, redo, or reset options or hide those. So here we are disabling these options. So in the embedded dashboard, you're not seeing any option to undo, redo, or even reset. If you set it to false, then the end users will be able to see those options in the embedded dashboard as well. Now, when all of these parameters are passed to this API to generate an dashboard embedded URL, it creates a response, and the response is sent back over here. Now, we are still looking at mode as dynamic mode. So once we have the response from this function, which would essentially contain the embedded URL, the dashboard URL. So once that is done over here, we move on to the next step, where if we check if it's mode or dynamic or static, and still, since we are already in dynamic mode, we load the HTML file, which is the dynamic sample.html, the file over here, and we point to a logo, that is the AWS logo, which is part of the content as well. So you could have any image over here that you want to show as a logo within your application. You could show your company's logo as well, the top over here. And now is a part where we read the HTML content and we update the HTML content. So if we go back to the HTML page, we have values that we need to embed, we need to update, or values that we need to provide over here. Now, in the HTML content, we have the dashboard ID list and the dashboard name list. So we are going to update the dashboard ID list and the dashboard name list, which is passed from the Lambda function. So for example, we already provided the dashboard IDs and we provided a dashboard name list. So the Lambda function reads it from the environment variable, and the Lambda function then goes back to the HTML page and updates this dashboard ID list and dashboard name list with the values that we provided in the environment variable. So here, the dynamic sample HTML page, these two values are updated so that in your embedded application, you see this dropdown. And these dropdown points to the correct dashboard IDs. Next, in the application, we read the HTML content and we check if the mode is dynamic or static. Now, since we are in dynamic mode, within the HTML content, dynamic sample.html, we replace QSEmbed URL with the embedded URL returned by our function over here. So if we go back, we see here that embed dashboard is replaced with the actual embedded URL returned by the Lambda function. So here we are updating that as well, and we are calling the embed dashboard JavaScript function with the embedded URL return. So within this JavaScript function where we have the embedded URL, we choose the container, the div tag, within which we want to embed our QuickSight dashboard, and we call JavaScript QuickSight embed dashboard function with different parameters. So these parameters would be the embedded URL, the container where we want to have our embedded dashboard. We provide the width and height parameters as well to size our embedded dashboard within that container. So when calling the embed dashboard JavaScript function with the embedded URL, QuickSight then would generate your embedded dashboard and show it within your application HTML page. Now, we also have another function called select dashboard, where choosing the options over here, like in the dropdown, if we choose a different dashboard, this function would get triggered. And within this function, we have a QuickSight function called navigate to dashboard. And there we pass the dashboard ID. So you do not necessarily have to create a new embedded URL if you want to switch between dashboards. You can just pass the second dashboard ID that you want to load and call this function. And this function would in turn trigger the secondary dashboard or the other dashboard that you want to show and show it over here. Now, once all of these values are replaced, once the embedded dashboard URL is generated and once the embedded dashboard is actually provided within this HTML page, the whole HTML page is returned. The whole HTML page containing the QuickSight dashboard is returned to the front end, and that it's returned via API gateway, and the users see the embedded dashboard. Now, we saw the values for dynamic mode. We saw the values from which we update the dashboard ID list, the name of the dashboard to show up here. But also, if you want to see what kind of what the embedded URL actually looks like, so for example, going back to the dynamic HTML page, we replaced the QuickSight embed URL with the actual embedded URL. If you want to see what that looks like, we do have another option here. So when providing mode equal to get URL, we just return whatever is the response set by QuickSight get QuickSight dashboard URL. So here you would see the response from this function over here. We have a successful call, so the status code is 200, and we have the HTTP headers with our date and the JSON return type. And the important part to note here is the embed URL that is being returned. So QuickSight, this API call returns this whole URL, which contains an auth code and which also contains the parameter or the options that we sent, like undo, redo, disabled, and reset disabled as well. So this is the actual embedded URL. So this is the actual embedded URL that can be iframe within your application. And since this is returned to the dynamic HTML page, we update this embedded URL in the dynamic sample HTML page, and we load the whole web page with the embedded dashboard. Now, I'll do a quick walkthrough of the steps here again for dynamic site. So we have an API gateway, and when we launch the API gateway from the URL, it reaches out to Lambda, and the Lambda function then triggers the get dashboard embed URL API call to QuickSight. Now, after QuickSight returns the embedded URL from this API call, the dashboard, the Lambda function then updates the dynamic sample.html page with the embedded URL and returns the whole HTML page to your browser via the API gateway. So this whole web page or the whole dashboard content is pulled directly from QuickSight. And in your browser, you see the whole HTML content, and your users get an option to switch between the different dashboards. And when they actually choose another dashboard, a call called navigate to dashboard is triggered, which in turn loads up the other dashboard. Now, this is how the dynamic site works. So this is one of the ways that you could implement anonymous embedding. But another way that you could actually implement anonymous embedding is using a static website. Now, you could have a static web page in an S3 bucket, and you could provision that or provide that to serve that using CloudFront. Or you could have your HTML page running in your on-premise environment as well. To simulate that scenario, we have provided another option called static embedding, wherein a HTML page is loaded first in your browser. So when calling this API gateway, when we go into this Lambda function, we choose mode as static. And when we choose mode as static, the HTML page is loaded, and we replace the dashboard ID and the dashboard names again to show as a dropdown. And in static HTML page, we don't call the QuickSight get dashboard embed URL first, but rather we actually replace. If I go into the static sample HTML page, we actually replace the QuickSight API gateway URL call instead of providing the embedded URL directly. Now, what happens here is, as soon as the API gateway URL, the same URL that we append, is replaced in the static HTML page, the HTML page opens up in your browser first. And then once the HTML page opens up, using JavaScript, we make a call again to this QuickSight API gateway URL. Now the API gateway URL is the same URL that we access the page with. So in the next stage, once we make a call to that KPI URL, we pass the mode as get URL. And we saw when passing mode as get URL, we see that the embedded URL is then generated from that API gateway call, and that embedded URL is passed to the embed dashboard function, and which in turn populates the web page with QuickSight embedded dashboard. So the difference here is in static mode, we load the web page first. We make a call again to the QuickSight API gateway URL, but this time appending it with mode as get URL so that the embedded URL is returned here from the Lambda function. And within that HTML page, we then pass this embedded URL to embed dashboard JavaScript function, and then we load the embedded dashboard. So in most cases, this would be the scenarios that customers follow. So for example, the static embedding flow is what would be similar to what we have here. So we may have a static HTML page in an S3 bucket, which in turn would trigger the Lambda function. And that Lambda function, when it returns the embedded URL back to the HTML page, the HTML page then embeds that in maybe an iframe or uses QuickSight's JavaScript API. And then that is served back to the customers or the end user who requested that page. So that is being simulated in the static HTML page or in the static mode. So just to summarize this whole workflow again, in the static side or in the static mode, we trigger the API gateway that would in turn return the HTML page. So the API gateway would call Lambda function, and Lambda function would return the HTML page to the browser. And this Lambda function will in turn make a get dashboard embedded URL call from within the HTML page. So for example, once the HTML page loads in static mode, the JavaScript function here would call the API gateway URL again to generate the embedded dashboard URL. And that embedded dashboard URL is being utilized in the front-end JavaScript function here. And with that JavaScript function enabled, the HTML page actually embeds the div tag or the div container with the embedded dashboard return, and then it is shown up in the HTML page. So essentially the difference between the dynamic and static mode is in dynamic mode, the browser is provided with the HTML page with the embedded dashboard loaded. But in static mode, we load the HTML page first, which in turn would trigger the Lambda function again via the API gateway URL, and then the embedded dashboard is loaded after the HTML page is loaded. Now, this is one of the ways that you could embed a QuickSight dashboard in your application without any kind of user provisioning and allow tens of thousands of users to access that embedded dashboard in your application. Now, to summarize, we saw the impact of embedded dashboards and what it could provide to your application. It could differentiate your application from all of your other competitors, even providing an embedded analytics options in your application. It could even allow you an upsell opportunity where you can create a product that allows your end users to interact with it and even create dashboards or visuals within your application. Now, with QuickSight's embedding, QuickSight is serverless. You don't have to manage any kind of servers, or even with anonymous embedding, you don't even have to provision users. QuickSight takes care of everything. QuickSight scales automatically, no matter how many users visit your application and no matter how many users utilize this embedded dashboards or view this embedded dashboard. QuickSight can scale and accommodate it. And with QuickSight's other features like row-level security, column-level security, and even namespaces feature, you can set up a multi-tenant environment. You could allow your clients to create their own resources or even like restrict access to different dashboards or provide specific dashboards to specific users. And since provisioning or row-level security or column-level security applies at the user level, we're also working on a functionality to restrict anonymous embedding use cases. So you can even set up restrictions for users who are consuming your anonymous embedded dashboards. So you could provide specific rules, so only certain set of users see certain data within your embedded dashboards, even in anonymously embedded. With that, I would like to open the floor for any questions that you might have. We could make this session an interactive Q&A session.
Thanks, Raj. We're looking forward to having some questions from the audience. Why don't we go ahead, and if you have a question that you'd like to ask, why don't you go ahead and raise your hand, and I'll open up your mic and we can take those questions now. And Raj, while we're having folks figure out if they do have some questions, I wanted to point out I did put a feedback link in the chat. We'd love to hear from you, whether you have any observations about how this learning experience has gone for you, or any feedback for us. We'd love to see that. And Raj, I was going to maybe start with a question of my own. I wondered if you might be able to talk a little bit about the developer portal that we have, and just point people to that as a resource for maybe learning a little bit more about how to set up embedded dashboards. I do think that that's a great place to pay attention to kind of the SDK and a few of the examples of personalizing for your users, or even doing embedded authoring. Do you have anything to share on that one?
Absolutely. Thank you, Jill. Thank you for asking that question. So we have a developer portal which provides you the steps to implement embedding. So it has three different options where it has steps to embed a dashboard with user provisioning, and it has steps to implement embedding without any kind of user provisioning, or even embed QuickSight's console as a whole within your application. So for example, let's start with embedding with user provisioning. The developer portal, you can access it via developer.quicksite.aws. And let's try displaying dashboard for your users. This is user-based embedding. When I click on try it, it shows you the look and feel of how the embedded dashboard can be like. So we also had a question if you can pass parameters from your applications to filter the data out. You can absolutely do that. Your application could have different drop downs and different values, and you can pass those values to the QuickSight dashboard underneath and pull up specific data. So for example, right now, the company is all. If I choose a different specific company, the QuickSight dashboard updates and the visuals are filtered based on the value selected in the application in itself. I could even choose a specific region. And this provides an interactivity between your end users and the QuickSight dashboard. So you do not necessarily have to have these dropdowns within your applications. You can have these dropdowns within your dashboard as well. So within QuickSight, you can create what we call parameters and controls. So the whole left navigation can be removed from your application, and that can be implemented within the QuickSight dashboard. So the application development is passed on to business intelligence development, where your BI users can actually do the necessary parameters and values that needs for filtering. So this section shows you how embedding looks for users. The next section that we have is how to embed it. Now, this is segregated into different modules. It shows you all the requirements that is needed, for example, subscription to a QuickSight edition, and whitelisting the domain within your QuickSight. So the next section would be the different permissions needed. So you could implement embedding for users, and that user can be a QuickSight user who's residing within QuickSight, or it can also be a QuickSight user that is tagged to an IAM resource. It shows you code snippets in Java, JavaScript, or even Python to show you how to trigger the API calls necessary to return the embedded URL, and code snippets to show you how you can utilize that embedded URL returned from the backend server into your application. Now, if you want to customize your application, if you want to customize the embedded dashboard, we do have other options here as well. So the developer portal shows you what are the changes that needs to be made at the front-end HTML page to, to create a print option, or you can switch locale. So if you notice when we click on here, the developer portal suggests uh, the required changes needed to be made in the HTML page. So that's a locale parameter. So the language is changed from English. Or another feature that you can implement is switching between sheets. So for example, within a dashboard, you could have multiple sheets. So let me open a QuickSight dashboard that has. Okay, sheets, you can think of sheets as tabs within your dashboard. So one sheet could show different visuals and another sheet could show a different set of visuals. So you can switch back and forth between sheets in your dashboard, and you can even implement these sheets as details. Like for example, if you click on any value in a visual in sheet 1, you could set up navigation to the second sheet, and the second sheet could contain a table that shows more details about that particular visual or about that particular metric. Now, you can implement that in embedding scenario as well, and you can pass the different sheets that you want to load. So when you click on any of the sheets here, for example, it suggests you the changes that needs to be made. So it will invoke a navigate to sheet JavaScript function, and we pass the sheet ID, and that particular corresponding sheet would be noted. So you can actually, instead of displaying all the sheets in your embedded dashboards, you can just display a specific sheet and have the control within your application, so that from your application you can pass the necessary sheet to load, and you can choose the sheet that is displayed in the embedded section. So the developer portal shows you the different level of customizations and actually the whole process of creating an embedded dashboard that you can utilize in your application. Now, this is for user-based embedding, and we also have samples for anonymous embedding, which we discussed today. It shows you how it looks, it shows you the steps, and even it shows you the different customization options you can have at your front-end application. And another embedding that scenario that we have is dashboard authoring. So instead of just having a dashboard or a set of dashboards embedded in your application, you could have the whole console experience embedded as well. So for example, if you check here, this is how a whole console experience would look like. So within an application, we have the whole QuickSight look and feel. So users can navigate to the dashboards that they created, the analysis, the different data sets that they have access to, and they can create dashboards or visuals within the embedded console within your application. So for example, this is a great use case when you want to create a base data set. So if you have a database that has tables for different clients, you can create individual data set that a specific set of users should see. You can share that data set with them. And once those specific set of users come in to your application, they are presented with this console experience where they can utilize the pre-existing data sets that you created, and they can go ahead and create different visuals, dashboards, within this console experience. Now, our portal also has steps to show you how to do a session-based embedding. So the whole console is embedded in your application, and also it shows you the different options to customize it. So you can change locale back and forth. So the exact console is presented over here. Shared this in the chat section as well. Okay, Sejal has already shared the link for Developer Console, but this is a great place to start, and this is a great place to check out if you need any specific steps in embedding, or if you need any kind of reference to customize your embedded application.
That is fantastic. And I think that we did a good job of answering questions that were coming in through the chat. And with that, what I'd like to do is just again encourage you to look in the chat window and click on our survey that just helps us understand how to get better every time. But I would also remind you that we are running essentially weekly workshops for the next couple of months. There will be new workshops added to the link that I just put in the chat window by the end of this week. So we're adding another workshop on using an administrative console with QuickSight, and also a little bit more on BI operations. So look for some new sessions coming later, and we hope that this has been valuable for you, and we'll be posting the recorded version of this for you to go back over or to share with colleagues to our Amazon QuickSight YouTube channel by the end of the week. And if you're finding value in these, you may even just want to subscribe to the YouTube channel. So thanks for your attention today and for spending time with us. Hopefully this was a great way for you to learn more about anonymous embedding with QuickSight. And thank you, Raj, so much for sharing your expertise with us. I learned something every time, and it was really wonderful today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Thank you, everyone, for your patience and your time today.